house? Okay, take a look at how you are. You're facing back. There was a track that came off right here and went down. And there is Mr. Morgia, 19 years old. 1948. Yeah, he's now 29, so. This is 1948, as Jimmy said, in the spring of 48, when we found this photograph. I said, he's not going to believe it. I called him up. I said, I got to meet you at the Mayapack Library. I have something to show you. He just looked at it and looked at it. He said, I don't remember them taking this photograph. And a lot of us are that way. We get lost in history. But here he is right here. You want to get the hand out a little bit back? What were you holding on to? You were holding on to the railing. On the turntable, there was a railing. Right. And what happened here, and I was going to have Jimmy explain it, but I'll explain it for you. Basically, when they left the station, they backed the cars into the yard, but just clearing the switch, right? And then they unhooked the engine and backed the engine from that direction onto the turntable here. You're looking at the engine already turned, and they had to do it by hand. So Jimmy and the conductor went around and turned the whole engine around to face it towards New York to go back to Sedgwick and High Bridge. And the reason they had to turn it around was they couldn't back a steam locomotive all the way down the 50 miles, or I think it's 46 miles from here. What happened was this yard filled up very, very quickly. And after Jimmy turned the engine around, the engine came off the turntable here and headed right through where those trees are, back down onto the main line. And then it came up one of the tracks in the yard, picked up its two coaches, and then it moved down back into the yard. And they had all ways of devising things. The putt, God love the putt. They had a milk can in the yard. Remember the milk can? One of those metal milk cans. And the engineer would bring his engine and the two cars that he coupled up to, right up, you look out the window, right to the milk can, and you see photographs of all the trains lined up very neatly. In fact, in my book, we have a drawing that my sister made that said that the fireman and the engineer would line up the trains in neat order. And that was the putt. They were very neat about doing things. The one thing I want to tell you is, in one of the DVDs, and one of them comes with the book, but one of the DVDs I'm going to show at the museum today, you're going to see the engine go off the other way. Now, Jimmy's the guy that informed me of why. Instead of, when the engine backed onto the turntable to be turned around, instead of coming off this way, they went north. And I said, Jimmy, why would they do that? He has the answer. There was a fifth track, 5 tracks in this yard, and one was called the overflow track, right? And the overflow track, the diagram is good. On the overflow track was put the last set of trains. And I say set, because this is the only yard where they kept the coaches attached to the engine overnight. So that train went over there, the overflow track. There is a movie you're going to see today if you come back to the museum, showing that engine going off northbound towards the station and backing towards the station, picking up its cars, and it had left them on the main line, and then coming on to the overflow track to rest for the night. Now, another thing Jimmy taught me, he taught me a lot of things, believe me. I couldn't have written the book without a Jim Morgia being my assistant. The other thing that Jimmy taught me is that after all the coal was used in the tender, there was only half a load. So I said, what did you have to do? Walk all the way back to the tender and shovel the coal into the firebox that way? I said, you would have wore out before you got to New York. He says, no, there was a coal pusher. Oh, I said, a mechanism? No, he says, a guy with a shovel. And this guy would move the coal forward. And they call him a pusher, right? It was a hot pusher. And he would move all the coal all night long in 5 engines.
Wow.
And it took him a long time to do it. So in the morning when Jim came to work to take the train down to New York, all that coal was handy near the front of the tender section. People wanted to know why they didn't have a coaling facility here. in some of the books that were written 20 years ago, 30 years ago, they used to say at the engine house in Yorktown Heights. Well, they didn't have an engine house here. There wasn't a turntable or a roundhouse, they called it. There was the turntable for turning the engine. They only coaled up in New York City. And then when the diesels came, they flip-flopped it. They had to put fuel in the engines, diesel fuel, and guess where they got it from? Harmon. And they had a tank truck go over, and you just told me this recently, and I would have put it in the book if I had known about it. They went over to Harmon with an old Shell tank truck, and it might have been Shell fuel, probably was Texaco. But they filled up there, and the guy that used to push the coal still had a job, and he would fill up the engines here in Yorktown Heights. If they went on the Brewster, of course, they would fill them up at the Brewster yard. The other thing is that when they got to New York, the diesels didn't have to be turned anymore. So what happened was the diesel would run around the train, they call it, to the other side, and have enough fuel to get back here. Did they ever run out of fuel, guys?
Well, they had gauges on them. There was times they had to call along the road sometimes.
There you go. You're hearing it from right from the fireman himself. And, of course, he became an engineer. But at that time, as a fireman, they had to let the agent know that they were low on fuel, and the fuel truck would meet them along the way. Talk about a railroad operation, I'm telling you. You see why I love this railroad so much? It was unique. And this is a word that really describes why people fall in love with this railroad. And so many people have said to me over the last 3 days, you know, without a doubt, I walked the bike trail. And by the way, it becomes the South County bike trail right down the street here a little bit, about 300 feet. This is the North County that way. But people say, I want to see what it looks like. And that's why, looking through the book, and please join me for the videos today. You're going to see the pup like you've never seen it before. In fact, Jimmy's going to see scenes he hasn't seen, and he thought he saw everything.
Joe, you're going to have enough room in there for all this? I can't get over the turnout. You got a wonderful turnout today.
Almost
the weather had a lot to do with it. I think it's nice.
Thank you.
Good job.
Thanks, Jimmy. Thanks very much. It's an honor to have this fella here standing in that spot. From 1948 to now is what, 60 years, right? Even though we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of loss of passenger service, which I will spend a lot more time at the museum describing the operation. And I always forget this. Are there questions? Are there? All right, questions.
Most of those cars were the same ones they used in the Harlem and Hudson depression.
Basically the same.
About what year were they built?
1920s.
1920s?
Yeah. And they were really well used until they were finished. I mean, they were run right into the ground, weren't they? But they were built very well. So a lot of them lasted a good 50 years, 60 years. Because they were, after the Put abandoned its passenger service in 1958, some of those cars went to the Harlem and some went to the Hudson, north of Harmon. There was a group of cars for the rail fans called the Osgood Bradley cars, which were built even earlier than some of the other steel coaches. And they had mail cars on some of the trains. They delivered mail. Like I said in the station agent was like the UPS agent. Railway Express was a big business on the Put. And without a doubt, losing the passengers and losing those coaches, it meant losing the mail, too, because the mail was being sent now by truck in a lot of places, unfortunately. And it was a time period when the Put really took a hit, and that's why we lost it so quickly. Any other questions?
Hey, Joe, you were talking about coaling up there?
There you go. There's coal for the engine right there.
Coal right here.
You know, I'm sure you know that's the one you might have dropped.
That's the blackjack. Yeah, there you go.
That's good coal.